In today's photography tutorial, I'm going to show you guys how to photograph rings and jewelry. Controlling those reflections can be really tricky, but we're going to tackle it today and come out with some really awesome shots. Stick around and I'll show you exactly how it's done. Hi guys, I'm Ben from Adaptalux and welcome back to another macro photography tutorial where today we're shooting jewelry and in particular rings. This is a really tricky subject to get to grips with because the subject is really reflective. We need to control the light and the reflections in our subject so that we're not getting reflections of the camera or the photographer in the photo. We also need to be very aware of all of the light sources in the room around us because all of those will reflect in the subject as well. All of this is about controlling light, and to get started with that, we need to control our shooting environment in the form of a surface and a backdrop. So this is my shooting area here. You can see that I'm just shooting on my white table here, but this is not going to be any good. I mean, first of all, it's covered in stains and marks from all sorts of other shoots, but I want to have a nice black background or perhaps a colored background on my rings. You can see that I placed a ring down here on this black piece of plastic. Now this is really important to get this part right because this is actually reflective, and if you want a black backdrop, you're going to also need a matte black backdrop at the top here as well. So what we've got here is a piece of black perspex, and that is actually reflecting the darkness from the backdrop here. You can see if I place my hand behind my ring, you can actually see the reflection of my hand in the plastic down here. So if I were to remove this, you'll start to see the reflection of the rest of my room as well, and that macro subject holder that is holding up my my backdrop. And that's all hidden behind here. This is a flexible set of arms that's going to hold subjects and backdrops in place. My backdrop itself is actually one of our background gradient cards. So I have colored sides to this black backdrop as well, and you'll notice if I place a piece of colored card down here, you start to get that color reflected in the bottom of the backdrop instead. If you compare that to the black, you can see it's much darker. So we might play around with some colors, but initially I want to get a nice solid black background, taking advantage of the reflective nature of this piece of plastic down here. You can see that the subject is reflected nicely in this black surface as well. And with the types of rings that I'm shooting today, these sort of Gothic style rings, I think that's going to look really nice with that black reflection. Now, of course, a shooting surface and a backdrop is only half of the equation. We're also going to need some lighting, especially with a dark background and a dark surface like this. We're actually going to be getting some really poor settings without adding extra light. In fact, I'm shooting currently at ISO 160,000. So that's certainly no good for a final shot. We're going to need to add a lot of light and bring those settings back down to something more reasonable. Of course, we're not trying to expose for this background. We want it to be completely black or as black as possible. So we really only want light to be falling onto the rings. To be able to do that and not get all of those horrible reflections, I'm going to be using the Adaptalux Studio, which is a miniature lighting studio designed specifically for macro photography. So after adding a little bit of lighting, we're down to a much more reasonable ISO 800, and you can see here that I've placed two lights looking at my ring. The lights are coming from the Adaptalux Studio control pod here, which I placed up on a mini tripod, and that allows both of these lights to stretch around and point from two different directions at the front of my ring. Now, choosing where these lights go is very much a case of trial and error, especially when you have something as complex as this sort of skull ring. The reflections are going to be completely unpredictable. You're not going to be able to say, well, we want one at 45 degrees here and one 45 degrees here, because it might not look quite as nice on the certain reflections of your particular piece. It's definitely worth turning on the live view mode on the back of your camera and moving the lighting around to see what suits your particular piece. Now that we've taken that first black background shot, let me show you the difference between shooting on a black background and a black surface, and then a mirror with a coloured surface. As you can see here, I've just nabbed a makeup mirror here from my wife, and I've placed that down instead of that black surface just here, along with one of the coloured background gradient cards. And that is giving us a completely different image. You can see here that all of that colour is being brought through from the background and is making this look a lot brighter, a lot more colourful, and potentially a little bit more whimsical and fun. So I don't really think it suits the skull ring, but depending on the jewellery that you're shooting, this is a fantastic way to add a little bit of extra eye-catching colour into your images, and it's really easy to change those out. So if I got my background gradient cards over here, and maybe if I add some pink and blues into here, you can see how that is going to immediately change that background colour really easily and quickly. So you can have several of these background gradient cards ready to go and just be changing them out depending on the shot that you want to go for. That's certainly an option, so make sure that you have a mirror ready if you want to shoot some shots like this. I think I'm going to go back to my black background just because it suits my rings a little bit more. Let's talk briefly about the single most important piece of equipment that you're going to need for a jewellery shoot, and that is a cleaning cloth, or some kind of cleaning equipment at the very least, because the worst enemy of any jewellery photographer is going to be dust, scratches, and fingerprints. Now, there's not a lot we can do about scratches. If the surface or the piece is scratched, you're going to have to remove that in post-processing. But dust and fingerprints we can absolutely keep on top of. You need to make sure that every time you move or touch your rings or your backdrop, especially if it's a reflective one like mine, that you're cleaning off any fingerprints that you leave. If your room is particularly dusty, you need to periodically make sure that that dust is not settling on the backdrop or on the shooting surface, or indeed the ring itself. I guarantee getting rid of fingerprints and bits of dust now while you're shooting is much quicker than when you have lots and lots of photographs to edit later on. Especially if you're going to do some focus stacking like I am today, all of that dust, the scratches, the fingerprints are going to show up in all of their minute detail, and you really don't want to be trying to clone all of that out later on. Get yourself a cleaning cloth out and make sure to rub down all of your rings, all of your jewellery before you start shooting. When it comes to scratches and imperfections, you might think that your rings are much better off than they actually are. If you wear your rings, or if they've been worn before, then no doubt they're going to be covered in tiny little scratches. Taking a look at this one, for instance, with the naked eye, you can see that there is it's a stainless steel ring, so there is a bit of a texture to it, but you can't immediately see that there are any imperfections or scratches, but I assure you that this is going to have quite a lot. Particularly these handmade rings here, where the difference between that sort of deliberately damaged side and that shiny side is so important. This shiny side needs to be absolutely perfect, and having just worn these for only a week or so, I can already see that there are imperfections and scratches starting to show up here. The way to get rid of this is obviously to get your rings professionally polished and cleaned before you start your shoot, but I'm not going to be doing that for this demonstration shoot, and you're going to be able to tell it's not quite going to do these rings justice. I recommend either shooting your rings brand new when they're still nice and shiny, or definitely getting them polished up, specifically for the purposes of shooting them. By this point in your shoot, you will have realized that every single reflective surface in your rings is going to reflect all of the light sources in your room, be that the light from a smartwatch or a smartphone, any lights that you have on the ceiling, windows as well. All of these things are going to be reflected in the reflective portions of the ring. Something like our skull ring here isn't too much of a problem because the reflective surfaces are all so small and so curved that they're going to distort all of those different light sources. However, when we get onto something a little bit flatter, like for example this reflective ring just here, it's just got a single smooth reflective surface, and it will distort distort those light sources, but they will still be recognizable for what they are. So if you've got a large window or perhaps a smartphone nearby, or indeed if the ambient light in the room is bright enough to show you as the photographer, then all of that is going to reflect in those flat reflective surfaces on the ring. So let me demonstrate that for you really quickly. I've got my two main light sources from the Adaptalux studio here, but I also have two large video soft boxes, and those two boxes are going to be reflecting in my ring. Now, it's sometimes a little bit hard to tell which reflections are which, but to double check, I'm going to turn out those two soft boxes and we can see how the reflections on the ring change. So as you can see, turning off those two soft boxes actually removed a couple of random reflections from the edges of the ring. And I'm not sure whether I prefer that or not, but those reflections were certainly a little bit hard to tell that they were from those soft boxes. Turning them off has shown me that that was actually adding an extra little bit of reflection to my rings. Now I might turn them back on again because my soft boxes are 5700 Kelvin and so are my Adaptalux lights. There's not going to be any mismatch in the colors there, but if you were using, say, a bulb from your normal lamp, you would definitely have some mismatched color temperatures going on here. So it's best to try and at very least keep all of your lights the same color temperature, and then any random reflections showing up will probably look like they were supposed to be there. Along with the position of our lighting, there's another way that we can control our light and how it looks on our reflective jewelry. That is by using diffusion. You'll already have noticed the diffusers that snap onto the ends of our lighting arms, and these are really handy for just softening that really small light source that can get really bright and leave really harsh reflections in a reflective subject like this. So adding a diffuser is going to make the surface area of your light much larger and increase the surface area of those reflections on your subject. That means much brighter areas reflecting in more places on your subject. However, if you want an even softer image, you're going to need an even larger diffuser. The way that I've done that is by using a sheet of paper curled over to create a sort of diffusion tunnel. This is going to ensure that the lights on my ring are really, really soft. Conversely, I've taken the diffusers off the lighting arms, so these diffusers snap onto the ends of the arms, but we're not going to need that now that we've got this much larger piece of diffusion material. We're still positioning our lights on both sides so that we get a big reflection on this side of the ring and on this side of the ring, and that is creating a much softer light along both sides of the ring. Now this is optional, this depends on the style of jewelry that you've got. I think for these rings that have nice smooth surfaces on them, they certainly look a lot better under the soft diffusion like this. It removes some of the imperfections and looks a little bit less scratched up. I've been wearing these rings for a little while, so all of my rings are far from perfect, but you can see that that softer diffusion makes a profound effect on the final image. Now that we have our backdrop, our lighting, and those pesky reflections under control, we need to talk about the last hurdle that always comes up when we talk about jewelry photography, and that is depth of field. Getting up close to a subject like this, particularly when it's really small, usually requires a macro lens, and macro lenses come with one big downside, and that is the depth of field. How much of your image is in focus at once? You can usually get the front of the ring or maybe the back of the ring in focus, but you can very rarely get both. There's a couple of ways to adjust your depth of field, one being your focal length of your lens, the other being your aperture. So you can always up your aperture to maybe f8, f11, f16, and you will get more of your image in focus as you go up those f-stops. However, that's not the best way to do this. You're still going to have some soft focus in the background no matter how high you go on your f-stop, and you're going to be introducing a lot of distortion as you get up into those extremes. So I'm going to be shooting my ring on a nice low f number, maybe f4.5, and I'm going to be focus stacking. Focus stacking is a fantastic technique to get all of your image in focus. It takes a little bit more time, it's a little bit more fiddly, it's a little bit extra processing time, but the results really are unmatched. The way that I'm going to be doing this is moving my camera slowly through the image, taking images as I go. So I'll be using the focus stacking rail that I have on my tripod to move my camera forward, taking shots as I go, but leaving the focal point locked in place. That means that focal point is going to move through the image. I'm going to then take all of those slices of in-focus ring and stack them all together in a program called Helicon Focus. That's going to produce a perfectly in-focus image by processing all of those images together and picking only the in-focus parts of the image. If you want a more in-depth tutorial about focus stacking, I will link to one of our other tutorial videos up in the top right-hand corner where you can go and learn all about how to focus stack properly. It is quite an advanced technique, but it's definitely worth learning if you're going to be doing a lot of jewelry photography. There really is no other way to get all of your shot in focus. So whether you're shooting at a wedding or maybe shooting some shots at home for an Etsy store, I think this is a really effective and lightweight solution to be able to set up a very quick little studio in your own home, light your rings without too much trouble, and get some fantastic shots. Speaking of Etsy, I did want to give a shout out to the person that made some of the jewelry today. His name is Rob Oates Jewelry, and you can find him on Etsy. He made these amazing rings that have that half shiny silver texture and then the half damaged, oxidized texture on them as well. I think they're really unique. I bought these ones for myself and I'm quite enamored with them. So I'm going to put a link to Rob Oates Jewelry down in the description. Do go and check out his Etsy store. There's some really interesting and very unique jewelry on there. I do want to know from you guys what you think to today's shoot and this technique of shooting rings and jewelry on a dark or colored background. I think using that mirror for a nice colored effect is really fantastic. I don't think it really suits the rings that I'm shooting today, but it's a really interesting way to go about it. And of course, that black background I think really suits rings that are sort of a bit more gothic and masculine, maybe skulls and all sorts of different things that work really well on black. Let me know down in the comments what you think, and if you enjoyed the tutorial, make sure to hit the like button, hit subscribe for lots more macro photography tutorials, ideas and inspiration coming in the future. But for now, that is all that I've got time for. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.